What do you get when a content wizard with legit cred, like working at Zoom and GoTo, talks trends and marketing and content and webinars and hybrid events? Well, I don't know exactly, but you are about to find out. My name is Roger Courville, and welcome to another episode of Thought Leader Conversations, sponsored by the crew at Virtual Venues, where, of course, you can instantly scale your virtual and hybrid event production team with a blue chip crew, achieve engagement and results by helping you focus on something other than tech. Now, I'm excited to welcome Rhonda Hughes, someone that I know is brilliant because I know her from more years ago than I can count, when GoTo was part of Citrix, which was like 2 companies ago. More recently, Rhonda was the head of content, social media, and customer advocacy at Zoom. And by the time you're hearing this, she will be public with a new role as VP of Corporate Marketing at Mural. We'll probably end up talking about that maybe. Rhonda was recently named one of the top 50 women in content, led the team at Zoom last year, and won the Best TikTok Campaign Award from Digital and Social Media Awards. We are blessed with the smarts of someone who excels at marketing, someone who knows the world of webinars and virtual and hybrid events and collaboration and, probably how to make a good pot pie or something. Welcome, Rhonda.
No pot pies, but I do make pie. My husband does most of the cooking, though, so.
That's wonderful. Hey, what else should we know? Fill in a gap or two. Is there something else that we should know about you before we kick things off?
A pretty good summary there. I mean, I've been in the world of marketing for 17 plus years. We were talking just before this about like how long we've known each other, because it's been like 17 years. And always in a role of content or webinars or some sort of helpful kind of marketing, whether it was social media or the likes. But so that's what I bring to the table. So let's talk about that.
Let's do it. And to me, I think of webinars and content as 2 significantly overlapping circles, in part because one is about the what and the other is about the how, or the method of distribution, which is not the only thing on the plate of a typical marketer. But let's maybe start with the world of webinars, virtual events, hybrid events. What the heck is going on in the world of virtual events?
I think the good news is that webinars, virtual events, the pandemic changed things. People are much more comfortable with things like Zoom and like virtual engagements. And so you've got a broader audience that, they know what it is and they know why it's valuable and they're all about engaging with it. I think on the other side of this, and this is not something that's just, unique to webinar or events, but content as a whole, it's really noisy out there. And it has been always, that's always been the struggle. Earning attention from a marketer standpoint is like the number one goal. But I think with things like AI, like the threshold for creating content, not saying good content, but their threshold has gotten much lower. And so it takes that much more to make your content stand out. And so I think that's really where the webinar and events kind of world is going, is like, how do you make something that is not just a thing, but it's actually really helpful, really interesting, insightful, and memorable, not to be boring. So
insightful, memorable. What was the other one you said?
Helpful.
Right. And just out of curiosity, what do you see the impact of AI being, since you just brought that up?
Oh, that's funny. I think it's a helpful tool, but I think it does, there's some questions that I have around just the need for media literacy, not as a marketer. There's like a moral kind of piece of marketing what is the source of the content when you're using AI to generate it? I think of it as a good tool for a first draft and for like opening up different brainstorming of ideas, but it really just makes the human side of what you can bring to content, making it memorable, emotional, bringing your insights, bringing your like little bit of flavor to the different things. It makes it that much more important. It was always important. You should always be doing that. But I think it's even more so now.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I've been preaching interaction as the unique and distinct advantage of real-time communications for a long, long time, right? I mean, one of the challenges, I even call it Netflixification, one of the challenges with just producing webinars that might be as interactive as watching yesterday's YouTube video is, to your point, out there in a sea of noise when it might be the ability to connect and interact that really becomes that point of distinction in this space. I'm just curious, where do you see webinars as a mechanism or a distribution channel relative to others? Like, for instance, your team won an award for TikTok, and you've got a lot of channel choices. When and where does webinars fit in the space as best you think of it?
I think it all depends on your audience. I know that's like that's the key to making great content, is know who you're talking to and know what they're looking for. And so thinking about like the context with which you're engaging with them. Sometimes they're going to be in TikTok and they're going to want a short form video that's personal and gives some information and is a little like, not polished. But in other times, they're going to want more of the kind of presentation style. I think, kind of going back to a comment you said just a second ago about like the connection piece, I think that's something that webinar stands out with, because you do have people there for an opportunity to learn and like ask questions. I still see too many people doing recorded webinars and not like really leaning into the live component. I know that that's something from way back in the day, Roger, you were always amazing at, and making sure that you're using the features that are there. So like the polls and the chats and the, unmuting people and having an actual conversation. And I think, I understand from a webinar or an event, kind of marketer, there's always risk with that kind of thing, but it's also the reward is there as well. And so I don't know if that answered your question specifically. I think it really does matter with what the audience is and what's the goal of what you're trying to do. And then webinar is just one of the many different formats that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, I think the "it depends" answer is, well, that's a good just bucket kind of answer, but it's also true, right? For instance, one of the studies that I, in fact, did for GoTo way back plenty of years ago asked questions about what people's expectations were relative to where they were at in the sales cycle. And for instance, they expected a lot less interaction if it was, a Seth Godin thought leader, top of the funnel kind of thing, than if it was down the road where they're where you were nurturing, or perhaps even at the end and selling and expressing explicit value of your own solution relative to others in the marketplace. Yeah. Curious about any other tips, and the reason I'm going to ask you this specifically comes from a viewer, Adam, who asked, what were some of the most effective tools or strategies that you saw utilized to engage the audience on the Zoom platform, aside from standard tools like polls? Yeah. You just rattled off a few. Anything else that comes to mind that you particularly liked about Zoom?
Well, I really love when people use the green screen kind of format. Like, I think it's so prevalent in things like TikTok, and people are just really used to it. Too many are using either talking heads, which has its place, or slides, really badly created slides. And there's just so many other ways, I think, to like break up the visual component of what you're talking through by being able to point to it and like move your little head around. And it's one of those features that I feel like most people don't know that Zoom has. And so I find that to be a really valuable one. And then, annotation, I think anytime, people are looking at the same slide. And so how do you keep their attention? And I know, Roger, you've always been so good about that as well, is like, let's draw this little thing here and let's move your attention over here. So I think those would be the two.
Yeah, I probably got to be a broken record. Direct attention visually and verbally in case they're not looking, right? So point and use the annotation tools or drawing tools, but also do it verbally. I love the green screen comment though, because it makes me think of maybe an opportunity or a need in the marketplace to do some education around that, right? You don't have to look like the most perfect, slick weather reporter on the local news.
But it's fun, right? To be like in front of the screen.
You like that? Okay. Oh, I'm in the Bahamas today.
I mean, I feel like having been in webinar world way back in the day, I do recognize that you're often doing many things at one time. So you're dealing with the Q&A, and you're prepping the content beforehand, and you're trying to moderate sometimes, which is not a good mix. And so I do think it comes from just a fear of messing things up and having too many things that you're trying to do at once. So I'm a big fan of having a team of folks behind the scenes to help with webinars where you can, at least with like Q&A and that sort of thing. And that way you can really focus on the kind of presentation piece. But I think as a webinar professional too, you do need to be able to coach your like speakers, because a lot of times they haven't used those features and they're uncomfortable.
Right.
Nobody wants to look bad in front of others, and nobody wants to look like they don't know what they are going to do. But I think taking that time to kind of go through a few of the features and is going to help people really see what the value is to their audience. And once you do it one time, you're that much more comfortable. But we sometimes do need a little bit of that like hand holding of like, ooh, let me show you how. And so maybe that's within the dry run kind of experience.
How has marketing for webinars or virtual or hybrid, how has marketing changed that you've watched?
Hmm. I mean, I think the basics and the foundation is still there. You're trying to get attention. It's just, I feel like it's getting noisier and noisier and noisier and more difficult to, you know, capture attention. So I think that's where you have to lean on these different formats like podcasts or live streams, repurpose, repackage, do a webinar, but also repeat that information in like short snackable videos, or kind of really just thinking about the context with which the content is going to show up. And I think in the past, and still today, a lot of content teams or webinar teams, they're focused not necessarily on the distribution of the content, but on the production of it. And so not thinking through, well, who's my audience? When are we, what is their experience of this? Is it showing up in a really noisy place like Twitter or on TikTok? And that's going to shape the way that you have to produce it, using those kind of features and functionality, being a part of the culture of where that's showing up. Same thing with webinars. It's like oftentimes email is a great way to get your audience engaged, but when are you scheduling these? What's the time period? Is it during lunch? Like, is it, and trying to think about that experience and how do you make it even better? And maybe even ask them, like, how do you make these webinars better? Your audience is going to be able to tell you that. And so building that kind of feedback loop and then looking at the data, what's working, what's not. Stop doing the things that aren't and start doing more of the things that are.
You heard it here first, folks. And it's just that simple.
Not
Well,
simple.
yeah, but you know what? I love that. I mean, interestingly, the pattern in telecom has been the same for decades, right? The busiest times for meetings, virtual meetings, conference calls, all of that has been, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday mornings, and, specifically Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday in that order. And I'm always curious if and when someone might find a contrarian strategy, right? To your point. In fact, you used this phrase a little earlier that, that I loved and want to just share. Create value, not noise. And one of those places that might be, can you do something outside of prime time, right? I mean, in the early 80s, somebody experimented. Television, crazy idea, but television stations used to go off the air at like midnight or 1 a.m., right? And somebody came up with this idea of buying up really cheap airtime and running a 30-minute infomercial, and everybody went, oh, you're crazy. And next thing you know, an industry was born. And, there are certainly cycles that we see, like lower participation in holiday weeks, for instance. But at the same time, I've seen some people have some crazy results predominantly because of that, because they were catching some downtime. I'm just curious, did you ever try any contrarian things, or do you have any surprises along the way in terms of your own marketing efforts?
Kind of always. I mean, I feel like testing and learning has always been a piece of all the things that I've done. Like, because I like the new, I like to like, ooh, what is that thing? Let me figure it out. And then you have to kind of look at what's working, what's not. I think, I've said this with social media too. There's this, the standard kind of posting time that most brands do, or for like tech brands or corporate brands, is like early morning on the Pacific coast so that it hits Eastern coast too. What I saw through testing one time is that actually nighttime that was when people were scrolling through Twitter. And they were able to see that. So we had this kind of process where we would share the big news in the morning, because usually that's when a press release or that sort of thing, the news is released, then you want to capture that. And you want to encourage like your employees to reshare that link, but then also that like in case you missed it, kind of testing the later time in the day or at night when people are scrolling. And so I love when people come up with new ideas on how to do it. The funny part is, as soon as you do it and you see success, all your other marketing friends, they see that and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that now too. And so this like constantly running just to stay in the same place. But I think that the things that you test that aren't what everybody else expects, that little bit of like something, is the thing that makes you stand out. And I've seen success with it in a lot of different ways, but social is just one of them.
Yeah, I remember. And actually, I loved this about your crew at GoTo back when we were doing a lot of work, because we had a chance, because you had that sense of adventure. And there were times when we had a chance to do something that was outside of the norm. I remember one project series I did for Scott Barnett, and I'll just mention his name because I also interviewed him here a couple months ago. And we did like 16 events, and the best results were one that happened on a Thursday afternoon, right outside of prime time. And I did another one once with Kelly, our mutual friend. And I'm like, well, why don't we try this like kind of early-ish on a Friday and see if, bam, we broke GoTo that particular day, which I'm sure was all her brilliance as opposed to mine. But
I remember things being, I mean, that's the thing, is you test something. If you're doing the same thing as everyone else, then you have more competition for that period of time or that thing that you're doing. It's the people that will take a little bit of risk and try something different that people will, like, I feel like that's where you will get that attention that you wouldn't otherwise. So
any other cool things you've heard about or seen or done with social lately?
I don't know. A lot of things. Well, I guess so. It says ex Zoom head of. I was impacted by the layoffs, the tech layoffs, one of the 200 some odd thousand people, across tech in the last few months, and I started a TikTok channel because I had never created content for myself, and I wanted a space to be able to share some of the things that I do. And the funny part is that like it's video number 2 went viral because it was just a silly dance of me like basically commiserating with what it feels like to go through this crazy time of being laid off and the feelings. Like you got a lot of feels, more so than I ever knew. I had been in companies that had layoffs, and I thought I empathized with the people that had been impacted, but there's like an emotional toll that comes. And so I did this really video dance, and I've had so many people reach out to me to say that that was such a helpful thing for them. So there's not really a lesson other than get outside the boundary and like try something new and think about the audience, and where there's a connection point. Like there's a lot of people going through what I'm going through right now, and having somebody do a little silly dance saying that it was going to be okay helped other people. And so, I mean, I think that applying that to marketing as a whole, knowing your audience and trying to figure out how do you add value, how do you help them, how do you entertain them, what are the things that are relatable within that space? It's the same kind of story, but a different wrapper, I guess.
I realize that example was personal, but I think there are some at least a couple awesome teachable moments in there too, right? I mean, we desperately need the humanization of companies, right? And some brands have a higher risk tolerance for personality than others do, right? But I think about, I forget if it was like a water district in Ohio or somebody just started putting out these brilliantly humorous tweets, and they built a significant following because they weren't talking about your local sewer system and the fact that Broadway was going to be shut down on Friday afternoon or those kinds of things. They were just talking about normal stuff. And I think you're the expert here, but it seems to me that there is this level of relatability, probably at the brand level, probably at the content level, maybe at the campaign level, where we want to know we're talking to or dealing with human beings. I don't know.
Yeah, I that's so core to the way I've always approached everything. And I've worked for really cool brands who did, I had to build in trust, especially when I first got into social. It was like a new thing, and I'd come with these like weird plans, and people would be like, what is she doing over there?" But like even the most boring brands have an opportunity to be more fun. So I will give an example here that is one that I always love is so when I worked at Citrix, so the corporate side of Citrix, we came up with this idea. We had a conference in person that was for our partners, and the theme was build. And this is a bunch of IT people. And I came up, my children were young and obsessed with the Legos at the time. I came up with this idea of like, well, what if we did Legos that were Citrix branded? And then we made these like stations so people could sit down and build like your own little minifig with your own little hairs and like accessories and that sort of thing. And I have to give credit to my partner in crime at the time, Sima Teslimi, because she went and made that happen. I had this like little nugget of a random idea, and she went and got like approval to make this thing happen. And we got it went crazy viral. We had 5,000 of those things that we gave away in less than 5 hours. And it became the standard for all of their conferences for years after I left, 5, 6 years after. And I still see brands like take that and do that kind of thing. So like all of our competitors ended up doing it. And it was one of those things just looking at, okay, so there's this, your audience, this is something that kind of resonates with them. And then you appeal to more the human side of things, and that doesn't mean that you have to be random because it has to be somewhat related. But it is again one of those opportunities to really kind of shine because you're focused more on connecting and adding value than you are on selling a product, but you're going to sell more product because of that. So
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that the bean counters sometimes forget is we all realize that we're accountable. But at the same time, when do you know? You can't predict when something goes viral, right? Sometimes you catch a tailwind, and at least as I understand it, most anybody who talks about viral goes, yeah, whether it's you got to be out there consistently, you got to experiment or whatever, but you can't predict, okay, of these pieces of content, this one's going to go viral. I mean,
there's usually some strategy behind it. There's some of it that's random and you don't know that it's going to happen. You're right place, right time, right audience. And then there's others where it's like, yeah, you're going to like, it's amplified by paid, or you're activating people on the back end to get the ball rolling. And there are some things to go with it, but you do have to have this, you have to be able to take risk to a certain degree. And yes, different brands are going to embrace that in different ways. Like, probably one of the things I've been proudest about is taking really boring brands and making them like fun and interesting. And not only is it works with your customers and your prospects, but it also makes your employees feel better. Like they're proud of what they're able to do, and like excited to be learning and growing in new ways. And so like I think one of the things that needs to go away is boring marketing. I feel like there's not any place for it anymore. Like you're trying to grab attention in a space where you've got kitty cat memes and TikToks and that sort of thing. And you have to be able to show up and grab attention. And so you're going to need to be able to think not just on, creating a thing, but how do you make it something that's interesting? And that takes that like human side of it. And it takes believing in the teams that are creating those things and encouraging them to take, healthy risks.
you may have just said it, meaning I might be asking you to repeat yourself. But how do you market things that are boring? One idea.
I don't think it's just one idea. I think there's like an approach, and I think one, you have to work for a company that's okay with it. Like if you're working for a company that's like, nope, we've done it this way, and this is the only way we're going to do it, and we're only going to keep them, speaking corporate speak, and we're only going to do it this way, then like you're not going to change that. You're going to have to go find something somewhere else that like will let you tap into that creative side. But I think it's taking a look and grounding yourself and thinking about the audience and like the context with which they're going to engage with this content, whether it's a webinar or attend an event or any other kind of format of content. And then think about those pieces. How do you connect? How do you educate? And how do you inspire? And it takes knowing the context with which all these things are happening so that you know what their headspace is. So how you use LinkedIn is very different than how you use TikTok or Instagram. And so what I mean by the context with it is if you know that you're creating this thing for Instagram or TikTok, you're going to approach it in a different way. That doesn't mean that you can't engage your audience in all of these places because they are active in these areas. It means that you have to approach it in a little bit different of a way. So I think that's a piece of it. And then I'm a big fan, like a more tangible one, I'm a big fan of collabs and like co-creating things. So finding, someone that's adjacent to you that is in a mutually kind of beneficial space and figuring out what you guys could do together that's going to co-create, that's going to create something more interesting, probably richer, in more in depth, and then you're going to build in distribution, that like co-promotion. So I'm a big fan of those kinds of things too.
I like that. But I'll put an exclamation point on something, on a couple words that came out of your mouth just a moment ago. There's no room anymore for boring marketing. Did I paraphrase that correctly?
Yeah, I did say that. I do believe it. I will say, how many times in LinkedIn do you see really good marketing? I'm going to butcher this because I don't know who it is. It was like a cereal brand that I saw an ad from recently, and it was like circulating in LinkedIn, and it was, they hired people with famous names, but not famous, to endorse their cereal. And in it, they put a little asterisk and they're like, this is not
This is not Michael Jordan.
They live in Idaho and, work as a retail or whatever kind of thing. And it's like those kinds of ideas, while that took a lot of input. And then I kind of geek out. You mentioned something about like social media that is unexpected. One that was years ago was TSA on Instagram, was like amazing. And I think about the background of this one lone social media person deciding like, this is what I think is the best thing to do. And it probably didn't happen this way, but I love the idea of how these things come to life and what someone had to do to get approval for them. Because I have worked for brands that were risk averse and had to like nudge my way forward to get to like a really good idea. And so some people are in the space where it does take steps. And then there's others that are like, heck yeah, let's go as big, almost like too big. But I think, I guess I get kind of rambling there, but I feel like those marketing, there's so many good marketers out there that there is no space anymore for just the boring stuff that's checking a box.
Yeah, and there's probably no excuse not to come up with a good idea that might work for you. I remember speaking to a bunch of trainers once for at an event for ATD, back then AITD, ATD, Association of Talent Development, and meaning I'm speaking to trainers. And I remember, because it was a very frequently asked question of me, what do you do when how do you be engaging when the content is boring? And I remember the snark that came out of my mouth. Probably shouldn't have, but I said, there is no boring content. There are only boring trainers. But the point was, actually, and I think I went on to clarify and probably said something about as snarky, like there are only lazy trainers, because it turns out, and interestingly, I ended up getting a testimonial from this person, and she worked for an elevator or a company that makes scaffolding out on the outside of buildings, right? And I said, okay, so let's walk through, and we actually made her an on-the-spot case study. Who's really motivated to be interested in this? And we just went down the list, right? How about the legal department? Are they interested in reducing your risk profile? Or the HR department because somebody falling off a ladder, scaffolding and dying would be kind of detrimental to somebody's family, or sales because they need to make more money. And it really kind of came back to thinking through a little more specifically benefit. And I think I got by with being a little snarky at that point, but I loved your point about.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I love the point about boring marketing. I think it's really useful to just dig in, right? I've done a lot of work for like boring groups. I've been told they are boring, like accountants. I've done a ton of work for accountants. Accountants are not boring.
No. Well, it's again, it kind of goes back to your audience. It's like, what do they geek out on? What are the things that like make them laugh? Like, how do you lean into that connection piece, which I know you have always spoken of when it comes to webinars, like way back in the day, is like it is an opportunity to connect and don't get too stuck on the I'm trying to sell this thing. And I think that's where it's the difference in the approach of how do I create something super valuable or super interesting or super funny or engaging to my audience versus I need to sell this product. And I think it's the subtle shift in the approach of that, because what you're going to create ultimately is going to be very different if you are approaching it in that way.
I actually started, I made it an opening line. Hey, you know, the world thinks you're boring. And they would all roar because they all know that people think accountants are boring and they don't think they're boring, and they're not. Shift gears. I know you did some great research at Zoom regarding hybrid and engagement. And I want to draw off of one of the data points that, and I'm not going to expect that you're going to remember it right off the top of your head.
Tell me the data point.
No, I'll set you up for success.
Thank you.
The question that we will get to, and then I'll fill in the gap. How do marketers or planners close the gap between in-person audiences and online audiences? So your data point was, the question was, event marketers consider interaction between virtual and in-person attendees and the ability to engage a greater audience among the greatest benefits of hybrid events. Number one response was, yes, let's close that gap. I don't see a lot of people closing that gap. So clearly there's a pain point. Any insights that you observed along the way?
I will give a props to Zoom's events team, because I think they do a really incredible job trying to like live and breathe and put a good example out into the world for others to kind of get inspired from, using their own tools as well. I think it's a big struggle because you've got two very different audiences. And one of the best things about being in-person events is the like networking. And so you'll see features and functionality of different tools really investing in that, is like, how do you facilitate connection and knowledge share that isn't like icky networking, right? Like,
right.
And not just like the booth experience of like getting sold tools, but how do we get connected more deeply? And I think, I don't know all the features and functionality of all the tools out there, but I think that's where the space is. And it is a lot of work. I mean, there's an appetite, I think, for in-person, but has that changed? I don't know. I've known from my own experience with events that like it's harder to drive live in-person attendance. So does the like in-person event evolve and it's more exclusive and smaller? And then you've got more of the broad audience over here for the virtual component. I don't know. I mean, that's not my area, but like, it's fascinating to kind of watch all of the spaces and all of the world evolve this last few years as like the world went through this experience of the pandemic, and being able to hear some of the cool stories of how people have reimagined. And I think that's that's the space that you're at with events is how are you reimagining it using the features and functionality? Like tech is going to be a place of that. Like you can't host these things without it. But I think it's gotta evolve. It can't just be the like presentation with somebody talking in front of it, especially with just looking at how busy people are now. So I don't have a real answer for it, but I do think it's a space that there are going to be more investment from professionals now, because I don't think hybrid's going away. I think that's one of the pieces that is just going to become the norm for any of these events, if they haven't already.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's something we do a lot of. And to be fair, for those of you listening, to be fair, that wasn't Rhonda's role at Zoom. So I'm asking her as an observer, as opposed to a practitioner in that really specific kind of way. And, it's a little bit self-serving in this way, because I'm a preacher of saying, number one, if you don't take it all apart and put it all back together with a design mindset from the very outset, then what you're going to end up with is an in-person event and an also ran for the people online who just happen to be flies on the wall and you miss the opportunity to blend the formal and informal. Formal meaning, okay, keynotes, breakouts, and the informal being, oh, afternoon break, coffee and cookies. Hey, what's your name? Oh, that's cool. And there's a whole lot of that goes on in person naturally, and it can online, but not if we just try to stream out our content and pretend we're virtual. So
I do feel for event marketers, though, because this shift, I mean, the amount of resources producing these things is no small feat. I've never done it. But like having done a webinar, a single event or like that kind of thing, there's a lot that goes into producing them. So you think about having to produce a full in-person and then layer in this like other thing and not just make it an add-on and make it like a full rich experience. I think it's been amazing to see how people have navigated that, but I'm not saying that's an easy thing.
You're exactly right. And that's why sometimes it ends up defaulting to the lowest common denominator when it doesn't have to. All right, one question, and then we'll get you on with your day. What does the world of webinars and virtual events need to be thinking about for the future?
I guess I kind of wove this in a little bit, but I would say don't just look at other webinars and your competition as inspiration for how you make good content or a good experience, or what did you call the Netflix? What was the word?
Netflixification.
Edutainment is another way that I've said it, is like, you're not just creating a piece of content or an event. You have to make it something that people not only take away the insights, but that it's memorable and that like they want to go more, like they want to come to your next webinar again, assuming that you want repeat listeners or watchers or whatever, viewers. I don't know. What would you call attendees? Okay.
Well, hopefully participants, meaning they are engaged as opposed to, snoozing on the couch with a little drool coming out of their down their chin.
So, I mean, I feel like that's where, don't just look at the other webinars because the probably basis there is like somebody's speaking in front of us, next to a slide, because they're not even using the like weatherman thing. Go use the weatherman thing because I think it's fun. That's not what it's called. I don't know what it's called.
Right. The green weather person thing.
I feel like it's leaning into the content itself and really trying to create something that's valuable. Do half of what you've been doing. And I know not everybody has the ability to say, I'm going to do less webinars. But if you do less webinars and you make them that much better, and you got more attendees or you engage a broader audience, then like you're netting out at the same kind of thing. So that would be the way I kind of think about it, is not to, look to other places for inspiration. And that really requires that you step back and you have some space to be able to think through things. And a lot of marketers are not in that place. They're doing more with less and they're moving faster. And so like, I know that that's a struggle. So I'm not saying, I don't know. That's what I recommend, that you step back and you try to look at how you're doing things and how you make them just a little bit better. It doesn't have to be completely reimagined, but what's one thing that you could do and kind of build the muscle around that with that kind of constant iteration and learning.
Rhonda, are there any questions I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I don't know. It's been interesting. I feel like I hopefully the folks that are listening, hopefully there was a couple little nuggets that were helpful there and I didn't just like blather around, but no, I mean, I think I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Well, and nor do I. Or probably said another way, we could probably go on for hours given how long we've been doing this. And I know we both need to roll. I will say this for our audience. We recently did an interview with Lauren Sawyer. I want you to look that up because she's doing something kind of interesting with marketing events that are using breakout rooms. And so if you want a different, just to see somebody doing something a little different, I know you probably haven't been to too many marketing webinars that used breakouts and that form of interaction as part of how just creating relationship. So with that, again, virtual round of applause. And thank you so much to Rhonda Hughes. Rhonda, best of luck with your new role of VP of corporate marketing, right, at Mural. And to each and every one of you, thank you again for, for tuning in today. Thank you again for our sponsor.